All right, Don, what do you have for us today?
We ready to go already?
No, you're good. I'm just saying, what do you have for us today? Part 3, right?
Yeah, got part 3, which we're going to make it the final part of the sessions that we've been doing, the installments that we've been doing on seller objections, the things that you're most likely to run into when you go out on a listing appointment, and some of the ways to handle those. You know, there's so many different scripts and things that are out there for handling those things. And you know, the old Tom Hopkins stuff about which would be better for you, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. You know, working on that assumptive close that where it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to meet. And now all we have to do is ascertain the time.
One of the oldest closings, and I know you may hit it today as well, but one of the ones I learned early on in my career was learning when to shut up. You give your presentation, you go through the listing agreement, and you put it in front of them and give them a pen and say nothing.
Yeah.
And most of the time, they're going to start signing. Yeah.
Whoever speaks first loses.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like the blink game. Whoever blinks first loses. They've been around. Not tell you those. I mean, scripts have been around. I love scripts, but really mostly from the standpoint of that they give you a good roadmap. You know what the beginning point is, what the ending point is, and you kind of just have to kind of fill in your own thing in between. Because if it's not really what you would say, then it doesn't sound sincere. It doesn't sound real. It sounds canned. And we've all heard it. We've all seen it, you know, where that the person learns the script, and they get started through the script and they get thrown off a little bit by a question or something like that they're not expecting. And so they have to go back to the beginning of the script and start all over again, because that's all they've learned. You know?
Indeed, you have to make it your own. It's like much of this is you have to learn the pieces, so you can shift gears, if you will, throughout the transaction or throughout the conversation. It's like a good speech. You always learn sort of like your opening and your closing, and then you learn the different talking points throughout them, so you can go any direction you want to when it comes to delivering. But as long as you have a strong opening and a strong closing on listings, your strong opening could be your, you know, how you introduce somebody when you first meet them. You set the tone for how the appointment's going to go. And in closing, of course, could be whatever it is you prepare. But the more you do a script, and then the more you make it natural, your own, then it becomes just natural. It comes up very natural and fluid. So.
Yeah, it flows. Yeah, it flows, as opposed to starting and starting, stopping and starting and stopping and starting, and all that hesitation. It's like, hang on just a second. Let me think about this for a second. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. That's not going to go over all that well.
I will say, from a training perspective, no one likes doing like role play and that kind of stuff. And then when you're, Don and I might do sometime for you guys, just so you know. But when you do role play, when you're the one reading the script, you feel like you're reading the script. You feel like it's awkward, and the other person thinks you're reading something. You'd be surprised. It doesn't really. On the other end, you know, you get more comfortable as you do it, but it doesn't sound as bad as you think it does early on, really. So
it's kind of like video. You don't look as bad as you think you do. We used to do video classes, and I would just freeze the frame somewhere, and it really didn't seem to matter where I froze the frame. If it was of me, I've got this stupid look on my face. And it's like, you know, the camera doesn't lie. You see that face that you see there, that face was actually made, that I really made that face. But guess what? People see that face, and guess what? They still do business with it. So
100%.
Absolutely.
Well, we got about 20, looks like 21 in today. So I think we're good to go. Yeah.
Are we ready to go?
We're ready to go. Yep.
All right, here we go. All right, so this is part 3. This is our 3rd installment. And really, there were 4 primary objections that we run into. And I've taken number 3 and number 4 and just kind of combined them together, just because there wasn't a whole lot of slides on either one. So I just combined them together. So our first 2 installments, first one was whether or not to accept your pricing. And of course, you can do these. These objections are probably going to start happening depending on how you do your presentation. I always start with price. I mean, I just always do. And the reason I always start with price is because I don't want to make it the last thing, because it's one of those things that it's always so easy to say yes or no to. And if you wait until the very end to talk about price, this is just what has worked for me. You wait until the very end to talk about price, then if it's not going to work out, and if you hold tight to your price, and I usually did as an agent, then I've just wasted, 45 minutes or an hour with other presentation stuff, with other information that really just didn't need to go there. I always start with price. It's like, let's get that one out of the way. If we can get that one out of the way and we can agree to this, the rest of it's going to be a whole lot easier.
Don, this is one of those areas where this is where Don's been in business for a long time. I've been in business for a long time. We've both done a lot of listings and had a lot of success. And I would completely disagree with Don, because for me, it's my different style, right? For me, I'd rather do you want to work with me out of the way first, and then make price a non-issue? Because I always talk about price being something we're going to do together, but not until we decide to work together. And so again, you have to decide what works best for you. You have a rationale. What Don said, why waste your time? I want to develop rapport. I want to show them what I can do. And I want them to commit to me before we talk about price, because price is one of those things. I don't want to win a listing or lose a listing based on price. And so there's a different viewpoint, right? So yeah. I want to win the listing and then have them commit to me. And then I'm saying, all right, now price is something that we decide together. Here's what the data and what I suggest. Now, what are we going to do? So it's just a different viewpoint there. Yeah.
And there's definitely something to be said for that, because if they don't accept me, then they probably won't accept what I'm saying. And so I guess maybe in my younger, cockier days, I just felt like, who wouldn't want to work with me? That's kind of a foregone conclusion. It's like, we don't even need to talk about that.
I love that. That's funny. For you guys, there's no absolute way you have to do it. You have to develop your own thing. So this is one of those things where you build rapport, you do price, you do it in any order you want. You find one that works for you.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of different listing presentations out there. One of the best ones actually that I have come across here lately is in Canva. That Canva's got a great one. And I think, you've got like different levels that you can subscribe to. And I don't remember, I think I've got Canva Pro, I think it is, but they've got a great, the one that I use, it's fully editable. You can do whatever you want to do with it. I really like that one, but there's a lot of them out there. Majority of them that are out there are kind of basic, and they're usually through coaching companies that's the lure that they throw out there to try to reel you in, our fishing analogy there, that they use to try to pull you in. So anyway.
And our new marketing design center has their own, you can customize, order one that's customized to you, personalized as well. And we have the digital version and we have the printed version. So
the old school version.
Exactly. Yep.
I think you should have both. I really do. I think you need to have both, because you never know who you're dealing with. You may be dealing with somebody who's on one side of 40 and somebody else is on the other side of 40. Or maybe, I don't know, what is it today? 45, 50? I don't know. Whatever that cutoff point is, I don't know.
I tell you one thing, and it may be north of 45 for that point, but there's something about a leave behind that says professional, and something about a leave behind that they can go back to. And when they're telling other people why they chose you, they can usually hand them off this leave behind, this professional brochure, listing presentation that you left as proof. Because people decide emotionally and then justify objectively. So they have to justify why they made a decision. So, yep.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. Maybe we should talk about a pre-listing package at some point too. We probably should do that. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. All right, so our second one, whether or not to list for your period of time, we had talked about the fact that you just want to make sure that you are giving yourself an adequate amount of time to properly market this property, because if not, then you're going to potentially do a whole lot of legwork and get nothing out of it. And then the next person who comes along benefits from all that legwork that you did, all of the foundation that you laid, and it all of a sudden they look like that they hung the moon because they got it under contract within 10 days, when the reality is it's probably from all the work that you did previously that got that information out there. So today we're going to look at number 4, whether or not to pay you what you're asking, which of course is commission. And I have to admit that when I put this together, this was put together at a time when it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that we were going to be asking the seller to pay both sides. And so when I got to looking at it, I thought, well, maybe I need to go ahead and update that, because that's not really the way it is today. But one of the things that I realized is that the same information, the same objections that we run into asking a seller to pay both sides, really the same objections we're going to run into just asking them to pay for their side, which is they're probably going to try to pay less either way than what we're asking. And so I left it like it was, because I really wanted to show that it really doesn't matter if we're talking about paying for both sides, paying for one side, that the arguments are probably pretty much going to be the same that we're going to run into. It's kind of universal. So, and then the fourth one, whether or not you have the ability to adequately market their property. And that's the part about selling yourself, where Marty says he likes to do that in the very beginning and get that out of the way. I save it till the end. And so, you know, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So anyway, we're going to do sections 3 and 4 together. And so the first part of it we're going to look at is accept what you're charging. And like it says, it's universal, really, that a seller is going to want a deal on commission. And that is, as long as I've been in business, as long as Marty's been in business, that's always one of the primary questions is, do I really have to pay this amount? And usually someone somewhere maybe has offered to list the home for something less than what you will want to charge. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard it, and I know Marty's heard it too. Well, so-and-so says they'll do it for X amount of dollars, just as a way of trying to make you go ahead and cave in and do that. Well, there's a lot of different scripts to handle that. One of my favorite ones, like I said, in my younger, cockier days, used to be, well, everybody knows what they're worth. But, you know, that's everybody has their own way of dealing with it. And so it's like it says, sometimes it may be true, sometimes it may be a bluff. They may just be throwing that out there, thinking that you will cave in and go to the number that they're looking for. So how do we get a seller to agree to the commission we charge? And it says, sometimes it may be as simple as explaining to them how the commission is going to be split up. And again, this really has to do with either way, if we're asking them to pay enough for both sides, or if we're just asking them to pay enough on our side, because we do have at least 2 parties that are going to be paid from this, the broker and yourself. And there's no reason in the world for you to try to explain to the seller how much the brokerage is going to get. Now, if I worked at a brokerage where I was giving up half, if I was on a 50-50 split, I would probably definitely bring that up to my seller. But when you work at a company like HomeSmart, where you're on a transaction fee-based scenario, and you're going to be able to keep the majority of it, I'd probably keep my mouth shut. They have no reason for them to know how much of what you're making is going to stay in your pocket versus how much is going to go to HomeSmart. And so in the old days, it used to be 4 people. And so we used to have to explain to them that, hey, yeah, you see $20,000, but that $20,000 is going to be split, in this case, 4 different ways. Well, in our case now, when they have decoupled listing side and selling side, it's still what you're seeing here. The number that you're seeing here is really paying 2 different entities. It's paying me and it's paying the broker. So sometimes they don't see it that way. They see a single number, and to them it's just a single number, and they don't really care where all it's going. And one of my favorite things, and I think I've talked to Marty about this before, and I don't even know if it's still out there, but one of my favorite visual aids that I saw one time, and I think it was on YouTube, because so long ago it probably was. YouTube was probably the only video platform out there at the time. It was this guy who had a stack of $100 $1 bills. He had a stack of $100 $1 bills. And when they asked him about whether or not he had cut his commission, he would take that stack of $100 $1 bills. This was a long time ago, out of his briefcase. That's how long ago this was. So he took it out of his briefcase and he set it on the table. And he counted off 6. He counted off 6. And he took this stack of 94 $1 bills, kind of pushed it to the side and said, okay, that's yours. And now he's got these 6 $1 bills. And he would say, okay, so we've got these 6 $1 bills. I'm counting off 3, setting it to the side, and said, this is what we're going to pay whoever sells your property. Now he's down to 3 $1 bills. And he says, this is for my broker. And so he lays that down. Now he's down to 2 $1 bills. He takes this other $1 bill and he says, this is for promoting your property. He puts it down. Now he's down to a single dollar bill. And he takes that single dollar bill and he tears it in half. And he says, this is for taxes. And now he's got 1/2 of $1 bill. And he says, do you mind if I keep this? And that was his way to explain it. You can still do that today. I always thought that's pretty gutsy. I don't know if I would have the guts to do that. But today, I guess it would be 3 $1 bills. If I'm talking about just the listing side, you can still do it. So anyway, visual learners is like, oh, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be asking you to cut your price. All right. Like it says, of course, many sellers already know. They already know how the money goes. They don't care. They still want to cut the commission if they can. And it says, you have to make that decision. As an agent, I always think about what's in it for me, right? And not when we're talking about commission, because that's what's in it for me. And so whether or not I'm going to be willing to do that, there are reasons why I might. Like it says, if I'm getting multiple transactions and I feel like a reduction in fees may be warranted, if they're selling a property and buying a property, then hey, okay, maybe I'll go ahead and give them a cut. Now, I will say, if I'm going to give them a discount, it's not going to be on the listing side. It's going to be on the back side, because if I give them the break on the front side, I may not ever get the back side. So give it to them on the back side. It encourages loyalty, where they will stick with you for no other reason, because they're going to see some financial gain from that. So that's fine. Maybe foster a relationship or honor an existing relationship. Excuse me. A lot of times people will say, hey, I've given you a lot of business over the years, and so maybe something like that is warranted. If it's only to me, if it's only their second one or something like that, and they say, look, I've given you business before, and so I would like a break on the commission, sometimes I might say, so how is this previous transaction that we did going to make less work for me on this one? If you're, again, we're just looking at devil's advocate here. If I don't want to do it, what might I say in order to stop that? But like I said, whatever the reason is, you want some kind of return out of this. If it's simply because the seller is wanting you to charge less in fees, try to get a commitment out of them. Looks like I got a typo there. Them to send you business. Giving up commission is the same thing as spending marketing dollars. If you don't get anything out of it, probably isn't worth doing. I make a big deal out of it. And today we see it in our buyer representation agreement too, not just a listing side, but buyer representation agreement side too, where really both sides are committing to paying our commission. And if you and I are ending up taking less, what do we have to do? We have to do an amendment to that document to show the difference. And so even though if I'm getting more, we know on the buyer rep side, if I'm getting more, I have to do that 1505 to show that I'm getting more. Well, I'm going to do the same thing if I'm getting less, because if I'm going to get less, I want them to know what I'm doing. I want them to know that, hey, you and I originally agreed to this, but in order to make this work, in order to help you, I'm taking less money. And that's on the listing side or the selling side, either one. I want them to know, look, I'm doing this for you. And so just like you gave me business before, and so you have an expectation of lower fees, I'm doing this for you, so I have an expectation out of you too. It's like everybody you come across from now on who wants to buy or sell real estate, you give them my information. I mean, use it as a way to increase business.
I would say two additional things on this too. It's your business. So you've got to decide how you want to do business, because you set it up and you have to have things in place where I don't cut this, or I do this only for these certain categories, and then stick with it. Is your business model, how you run your business. Because we do this a lot at HomeSmart. We have a lot of agents that give up some of their compensation that they've earned as a credit to a buyer, credit to a seller. You get taxed on that.
Yes.
As income you made, and you're giving it away, like as Don says, as a marketing expense. So take that into consideration. When you do concessions, you've earned it, you're getting taxed on it, which means there's an additional cost to you to do it. The second thing on this is old as the days are long. Let's say Don, a client of mine, comes, asks me for a discount, right? I'm gonna cut my fees because I get business from Don and so forth. But great. But let's say Don's the first time and he asked me to do his listing, or work with his buyer, and I cut my commission. He's happy with me. He's gonna tell all his friends about me and how he got a deal with Marty McClendon. And so everybody he refers to me will expect the same cut in commission. So it's not just the one client, it's every client they send your way, no matter how great you do. So make sure you're thinking long-term on these, and have a business mindset when you go in there, because you do it, it's going to be have multiple times, right, Don?
Absolutely. Yep. You don't want price to be your value proposition. You don't want it to be, I do it for less than everybody else. Because once you create that as your identity, once you create that as your value proposition, it's very hard to break out of that later on. Yesterday, we had an agent who sent in a door hanger who wanted to promote that information, that it made it look like that the value proposition was all about doing it for less than everybody else, or giving money back, and it's like, it's not a bad idea sometimes to do that. You just don't want to make that your value, because as soon as you make that your value, that's your value. And it's very hard to break out of it, because you're right that the example that Marty just gave you, as the individual who got that discount, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut about that. I want everybody to know what a great negotiator I am. Everybody fancies themselves as a great negotiator. I'm going to tell everybody, as realtor, as real estate agent who does this for a living, who always makes these deals every single day. Look what I got out of it. And what's going to happen? All right. Next slide says, if you decide you don't want to do that, then there are some strategies that you can use to try to keep it from happening. And the first one is blame your broker, blame Marty. Gee, I would love to do that. But man, that guy that I work for, he's going to come down on me really, really hard if I even attempt to do that. So sorry, I can't do that. I mean, just look at that guy. Look at that guy. You know what he's capable of doing. All right. So another way to keep the question from coming up is to create slides. And I found this one really, really effective, because really what it's doing, and this might be ahead of time. I would do this ahead of time. This is anticipating the question of, will you do it for less? Sometimes that question will completely go away if they see your investment, if they see what you are investing. And so I do have a listing presentation that has slides that talk about what the cost of each thing is going to be. And so it says, create slides or pages in your listing presentation showing the marketing that you're going to be doing and the cost associated with those things. How much MLS cost, how much the Houston Association of Realtors cost, how much all of these things cost if you're a premier agent for Zillow, how much that costs. All of these things that is going to be coming out of your pocket, show them what those costs are. If they see that it's going to cost you money that you're spending on their behalf, they may not even ask you. It may be something that you anticipated ahead of time, and you have that objection out of the way before it ever becomes one. It starts sounding cheap when you say, I'm spending this, and I'm spending this, and I'm spending this, and I'm spending this, and this, and this. And they say, well, could you charge me less? It's like, what did you not see here? And a lot of times they just may not even ask. Another possibility, it says, is to tell you someone else is willing to do it for less, where the seller has come back and said, so-and-so do it for less. And says this one, you have to be a little bit careful of because you don't want to denigrate somebody else's services. And that was what I threw out there a little while ago. It's like, yeah, everybody knows what the word says. You might want to reply by saying that, but that's probably not the best way to do it. Here's one that I have found that is really works well, that is really effective. I understand that others might quote a lower commission. I have known agents, not saying that this person is one of them, but I've known agents who really want listings just for the buyer calls that would come in from having a sign in the yard and the ability to advertise that listing. In other words, the value of the listing for them is to use it as leverage. Use it as leverage to get more business. Some of those agents don't really care what commission rate they agree to because that's not the purpose of taking the listing for them. The purpose of taking the listing is to get all this other business, and they're not really concentrating on yours. In fact, they really wouldn't mind if that sign sits out there for a while because of the business they're getting for it from that. So really care what kind of commission rate they agree to because their purpose isn't really to sell your home. It's to use it to get more business. Where on the other hand, my sole purpose in taking your listing is to get your home sold. Any other business that comes from it is welcome, but it's secondary in my focus to you. And I have found that really effective. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm just throwing out there that scenario. And I have found it to be really effective.
That's really good, Don. I like that. I think that the biggest thing before this too is setting the expectations. The biggest thing is you're coming in, setting the expectations of what's going to happen during the appointment. You're setting the expectations of how you work, how they can work with you, and so forth. And that you're going to answer their questions before they get to it. At the end, they'll have any questions. So if you anticipate, they're going to talk about pricing, about commission, about whatever. Like Don says, you can preempt them by answering them ahead of time. And so they're not really going to ask them anymore because you've covered them already in your presentation. And I like the idea of bringing the costs of materials. I always use previous listings, flyers or brochures or whatever, the quality of material that I used previously. And then whatever sales and references and that kind of stuff too. But when they can actually feel it and touch it, it's a big difference. So, yep.
It does. Absolutely it does. Yep. And then the other thing, and I mentioned it before, that this objection handler also can be used about taking it for too high a price. Where if for the listing agent who really might be wanting that sign to sit out there for a long time, they may take it 20% higher than it really should be because they like the idea of the sign sitting out there because they get more calls, they get more buyer calls off of it too. So kind of a double barrel approach there. It'll help you maybe on both of those counts. All right, so let's look at the last one, which is whether or not you're the right person for the job. And like it says, if a seller's asking, and yeah, I'm more than happy to share a copy of my presentation. I'd be happy to do that. And I have both. I have virtual and I have a book. I still have my book too. Probably have to dig it out somewhere and knock the dust off of it, but it's there. If a seller's asking this question, the real question they have is whether or not you have the ability to represent them and to help them get their home sold. When they talk about whether or not you're the right person for them, usually it has to do with, can you get the job done? That's what the question really is. They may believe there's some advantage to listing with a big brand because they don't understand how things work in today's market. And it's because they're familiar with the name brand, with a brand that's out there that maybe they know it. And the reason they know it is because they advertise on TV and they've got all kinds of information out there. But here's a great objection handler for that. So how do we convince a seller that we can handle their transactions? So this is another place where your listing presentation can maybe handle this objection before it actually becomes one. A sheet with a few stats and a true understanding of what your job is may help you with this possible objection. So what is your job as a listing agent? Your job is to promote and expose the seller's property in such a way that the seller can meet their goals in regards to time and money. And what do we know about listing property and selling property? It's all about two things: price and exposure. Those two things. You've got those two things worked out, then you're in good shape. So you're there to help the seller get the amount of money they want within reason, after the two of you decided on a price, and within an acceptable time frame. How do you do that? Well, MLS obviously is a big help, but you may choose a number of other avenues to help expose that property in the way it needs to be exposed. Back in the day, MLS used to be the well, still probably is the primary way, but it's not the only way. There's a lot of different avenues today, and you've got to be willing to investigate all of them. It used to be MLS and sign. I mean, that really used to be the ways. So many times sellers incorrectly evaluate how you have done your job based on how many people you personally show the home to. Wrong, right? And that couldn't be further from the truth. Your job is to expose it to buyers and agents where someone brings the buyer in for that property. Make sure they understand that, because once they do, it becomes easier for you to convince the seller that you can represent them in the way that they need to be represented. I ran into this very, very early in my career as a very young person in real estate. At the time, 23. I started in this business when I was 23 years old. And back then, that was a very early time to be doing it. Much less, it was not technology based. It was all definitely relationship based and experience based. Not like it is today, where technology is such a large part of it. My age is almost a disadvantage, where I go out on a listing appointment and they say, so you understand how all this technology stuff works, right? And it's like, yeah, I have to tell them, yep, I know how to turn my computer on and everything. It's good. We're good here to go. I mean, it's kind of the way it is today. I've never been in a business where when I didn't have experience, that's what everybody wanted. Now that I have experience, people don't care about it. I mean, that's the way it is. But here's what I learned very early on, because sellers thought, well, how many people are you going to show my home to? That's not my job. I mean, yes, definitely I would be doing that. My job is to get the buyer here. Whether I'm the one that pulls them across your threshold or not, that's not what's important. Sellers loved me as a young agent, because once I convinced them, once I made them understand that my job is to promote and expose their property to enough people that the buyer shows up one way or another, they love the idea that here they've got this young guy who's going to be out there pushing their property really hard and had nothing to do with anything other than, did I understand how it worked? Did I understand the ways that buyers are going to show up? Other agents, open houses, social media, all of that. Of course, social media didn't exist back in 1983, but those types of things. Don't laugh at that.
I'm laughing because I've been with you, right? I had AOL.
Yeah, I know.
So the other thing too is for our agents doing listings with sellers. The seller has to understand, and so does the agent, that it doesn't matter if you sell the property in 1 day or 1 year. The point is, you're signing up, you only get paid when it's done. Your job is to expose it to the right buyer, no matter how long it takes, right? And so, oftentimes if you sell it in 1 day, they go, oh, you must have sold it too cheap. Obviously make too much. No, I did my job. If I sell it in a year, I did my job. This is what you're hiring me to sell your property. And this is how I'm going to do it. So to Don's point, right?
Almost getting penalized for doing your job well. And of course, the seller at that point is probably going to think, oh, we priced it too low. Okay, some stats that can help you here. In the Houston area, approximately 92% of home buyers use a real estate agent to help them. In a lot of parts of the country, and if this person has not been in Houston all that long, they may not understand it, because in a lot of parts of the country, about 20% of the properties sell for sell by owner. 20% FSBOs. That's not the case in Houston. And now, off-market properties, which might be considered FSBOs in one way or another, gauging that may be a little bit difficult, but your actual for sale by owners, I mean, if you subscribe to like RedX or some of those, there aren't that many that come out. And a lot of them who start out as for sale by owners don't stay for sale by owners. They learned somewhere along the way that this really is not going to work as well as I thought it was going to work. And so they end up listing anyway. And that's another class we might look at doing, is working with FSBOs. I loved FSBOs. FSBOs and expireds. I loved them both. 96% of all home buyers, probably higher than that these days, use the internet at some point during their home search to help them. And 100% of the agents who help those buyers get their inventory from MLS. And so putting it in MLS, that takes care of a lot of it right there. But all these other different ways, like we talked about, so that means putting the home on MLS will expose their home to all the buyers who are using agents to help them, but also to the agents who are helping them. And of course, you'll be exposing your home to about half the buyers not using an agent as well, because they're looking at har.com, sharing information from Zillow, TruliaHomes.com, all those other places where you see them. Trulia, I guess, doesn't exist anymore, but we'll pick up those too. So to reinforce that exposure, of course, you're going to use social media, other forms of advertising, whatever it is that you choose. Our listing agreement says we're going to utilize our best efforts, and they kind of leave it up to us. They leave it up to us to decide what those best efforts really are.
Now, it's interesting too, because you can be creative on this. You have your own website. Back in the day, we do CDs, we do whatever. But if it's like property in a golf course, there are golf course periodicals, there are golf course websites, there's all kinds of stuff. If it's on the ocean or waterfront, there's waterfront places to market as well. You have to say, okay, where are the buyers looking for properties like this at? And you can be creative, and that they'll go above and beyond what other agents will do, and it makes a lot of difference. Yep.
I love the HAR reverse prospecting. I love that, because that a lot of times that will at least draw attention to the property, then maybe that agent has already found something for that buyer or something like that. But if you're not familiar with reverse prospecting, it's where agents have put in on their prospect list in HAR what the person's looking for. And then when you take a listing that matches that criteria, or even comes close to matching that criteria, you can send that agent a message saying, hey, you were showing a buyer, we don't know who the buyer is, you were showing a buyer property that was this criteria. I now have a listing that is that criteria. So if you're still working with that buyer and you're still looking for a property, this might be one that you might consider showing them. And you can dig out 2 or 3 showings out of that. I have had real good luck with reverse prospecting. So, all right, the last slide that I've got here, your listing presentation can be a key factor in handling objections before the seller even raises them with you. In handling the objections, you're also answering the questions that the seller has: the who, the what, the when, the why, and the how. And they already know the where. It's their listing, their property, they know that. But the rest of those things are all going to be answered somewhere along the way, and the how much too, for that matter. Create your listing presentation in sections. I try to get an agreement on each section before we move on to the next one. That way I feel like that by the time we get to the end of it, if I've got a yes, a yes, a yes, and a yes, getting that listing at that point is probably going to be a heck of a lot easier. Where I know a lot of times people just present, and then you get down to the very bottom line and it becomes a yes or a no. And that's kind of hard. Then maybe you'll have to go back and say, okay, well, let's figure out which one of these things is really creating the no. And then maybe I can go back and fix that at that point in time. But everybody does it their own way.
It is good to get to yes many times, so that they're used to saying yes. That's good. Oftentimes you can do this early on by setting the expectation, asking questions, what they want to cover, and then to reassure them you're going to cover those issues, those questions in your presentation, and then you check back with them. Did I cover them? Did I miss anything before we move on? There's a way to get yes that way, an acknowledgement from your listing presentation. And the same thing here. I think one of the biggest things that newer listing agents do wrong, they may have a great presentation. They may be able to do a lot of different things, but they have to set the expectation around communication. Because let's say you win the listing and you go to work, and then there's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and there's nothing going on, and you're not letting the seller know. The seller's going to fire you in a heartbeat because they don't know. So you set the expectations that, look, this is what we're going to do. This is what the market's telling us. This is how we're going to test it based on the number of showings we have, the number of clicks online we have, the number of feedback we get. We're going to talk every week, set a time. So you're setting the example of, this is what you would expect from me, clear and consistent communication. Whether there's anything to report or not, we're going to report back, and then we're going to adjust according to what the market's telling us. And I tell you, that's one of the biggest things for me over my career is if you can do that. So it's for you, you're not getting called every single day by your seller saying what's going on. And they know that you're going to call them Friday at 10 a.m. with an update on the property, unless you have an offer, right? And this is what we've done. This is the response we've gotten. And sellers are at ease. But that's the biggest thing for a seller is they sign the listing agreement and they're waiting, and that's the worst part. Buyers you're working with every single day, they know what you're doing. You have to show the seller what you're going to do, and then you have to follow up and do it and report back to them. And then you're going to have great business and a lot of referrals because of it. Don?
That is a critical error that a lot of listing agents make, is that they get to that time of the week where I really should be calling my seller, but I don't have anything to tell them. And I feel like, gee, maybe if I call them, then it's going to be embarrassing because I don't really have anything to tell them. They're going to be upset with me or whatever it is. One of the things the sellers just don't know is what you're doing behind the scenes. And you should always be doing things behind the scenes to help promote that property. And they don't see that. All they see is what they see. And if you don't make them aware of what you have done during that week, just because it hasn't led to an offer or a contract or any of that, doesn't mean you're not working on it. They need to see that you're working on it, because a lot of times what ends up happening is that the listing agent puts it off. Now, all of a sudden, we're at the end of 90 days and it's time to either renew the listing or lose the listing. And so now all of a sudden the listing agent shows up. The listing agent shows back up. I want to do an open house. I want to do this. And, and the seller can see through that. They see that the whole reason that you have regained an interest in their property, according to them, is because it's time to renew. And a lot of times it's going to tick them off to the point where it's like, forget it. No, we went all this time and you were not in contact with me at all. And now all of a sudden, now you take an interest in me again. I don't think so.
Now, if you're a listing agent and you are communicating, but they're calling you on a regular basis saying, hey, can we do an open house? Hey, can we do this? You haven't communicated what the plan is and what you're doing to follow up with it. They're grasping for information. They're grasping for something to happen. That's why, again, go back. This is our plan. Yes, open house is part of the plan. We did this one here. Here's the feedback we got. Here's what the next step is in our plan. You remind them of kind of how you work with them, and they're comforted again. But they'll be calling and asking additional things because they don't see anything. They're not getting the report, as Don says, of what you're actually doing for them. So it's communicate, but do it in a way that actually works, so you'll do it.
Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep. And going back to expectations, that is critical for them to understand exactly what the expectations are. I have a whole section in my listing presentation, and that section starts out with a quote. The guy that was my mentor in real estate told me something very, very early on in my career, and it has always stuck with me, is that conflict rarely exists when expectations have been met. And I have remembered that, and I use it all the time. And I even have it as a quote in my listing presentation, because I use that as a lead in to, okay, here is the section where we're going to talk about what you can expect from me and really what we expect from you, because this is a two-way street. It's not just I'm serving. There are things that you have to do. This is a partnership. I take care of part of it. You take care of part of it. I've got a job to do. You've got a job to do. You're allowing us to put this on MLS. The expectation here is that by doing that, you're going to have other agents from other companies coming into your home and showing it. You, as the seller, you've got some duties and responsibilities too. One of them is to keep the property in showable condition. And I tell them that from the very beginning, that the expectation here is that I'm doing everything I can to put your best foot forward. By putting my best foot forward, you need to do the same thing. And you need to allow it to be shown. Yes, I understand that maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening when you're eating dinner, the answer is going to be no. But if we try to show your property 45 times and 38 times you say no, that is not you doing the things you need to do to help yourself. And then it's like you're creating an immovable object. And now that this is an immovable object, it doesn't matter how hard I push, it's not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And little things as well on the listing presentation about condition of the property. You want to make it look as great as possible when they step out of the car, right? So what can we do? What little things can we do to make sure your home is show ready? And that's where the seller comes in. You can give them advice, but say, this is what, you want to get top dollar, you want to sell it as fast as possible. Here's what you need to do on your part. So,
Yep. And last week we talked about that correlation between time, price, condition. That if you want the best price in the least amount of time, you've got to have the best condition because you're competing. So, yep. That's all I've got.
Nice job, Don, as well. Everybody wants a copy of the slide deck. Of course, we have the videos going to be posted. I'll send the video out later today so you guys all have a copy of this presentation. But the slide deck's great. Thank you. This has been fantastic. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience, but you're very good at what you do, Don. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I loved being a listing agent. It was kind of thrust upon me early on in my career because, again, at 23 years of age, buyers didn't think I had enough life experience really to help them. I mean, I had people say, they'd look at me and even at 23, I had a baby face anyway.